Paul Perrier, welcome to the podcast.
Hold on one sec.
Okay.
Hey, Mark, do you want to
Hi.
start again? Something came
Oh,
up on my screen.
oh yeah, sure. Yeah, Paul Perrier. Paul Perrier, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Great to be here.
Thank you. So, yeah, I see you have a book out, and you had made a documentary at some point on a very low budget, and I can't wait to hear more of the story. And it really took off and got the attention of some very interesting, well-known people. So yeah, please tell us the story about that.
Okay, well, the book that I've written is called Cracked Wide Open. It's a book, it's a memoir about my life as a artist, a photographer, and I became a documentary filmmaker. And it revolves around a documentary that I shot 20 years ago, called Cracked Not Broken. And Cracked Not Broken is a real-time documentary. It wasn't planned. And it's a story about my ex-wife's oldest friend who became a prostitute to support her crack cocaine habit. And it was shot in a hotel room in downtown Toronto in an hour. And we used the film to try to help the subject get to sobriety. And if that didn't help happen, we were hoping that it would help other people. Her story would help other people, inspire other people to keep trying to quit or get off drugs.
Well, and that you were actually on Oprah, right? On Oprah Winfrey, on the Oprah show.
Yeah, yeah. So I screened this film for the first time in September, on September 12th, 2005, at a theater 2 blocks from here, a Repertory Theater. And I invited family and friends and anybody who, who I'd worked with to come. I think about 100 people showed up. And we screened the film, and the subject and I answered questions after. And after that, the film took on a life of its own. And then almost 9 months later to the day, we were on the Oprah Winfrey show. Lisa was, and they were talking about my film, or the film, our film. And that led to it being one of 4 independent films included in HBO's Addiction series in 2007. So it went, my film, from showing it to friends, went around the world. And part of what my book is about is the reaction that that film got from people, because anybody who saw it, if you didn't react to this film, you're not human in some sense. Had you ever heard of my film?
Yeah, I'd heard of it. I have honestly, I have not seen the whole thing all the way through, and I really want to watch it now. I've seen parts of it,
Yeah,
and it really, yeah, it does grab your attention. I mean, just um, the story, because it's I think her drug of choice is crack, right? Which I think is where the name comes from of the film,
yeah,
and and I think people kind of joke about crack. It just comes up in conversation, and it's really an extremely tough addiction to overcome. I mean, opioids are tough, and I mean, opioids are much more deadly than crack. I
yeah,
mean, crack addicts seem to kind of linger around forever. Not too many people know. I mean, they die from crack overdoses and medical conditions and HIV and things like that. But for the most part, not too many people know crack addicts who have died from crack. But everybody knows an opioid addict who's died from an opioid overdose, unfortunately. And
right.
but crack is a probably a maybe a more difficult thing to overcome. I've even heard, in the 90s, I remember hearing a someone say that a lot of crack addicts are switching over to heroin because it's easier on them and gives them a path maybe to get into recovery. That it's such a hard thing to get over, and and you just go, and I guess it's the kind of thing where like smoking or overeating, you just make light of it. You're like, well, maybe I'll quit tomorrow. And
Yeah.
but you just see it, and it doesn't. It's not like maybe like opioids or alcohol where you black out. You actually see your life falling apart around you and very vividly, and you're very aware of what's happening. And it's just a horrible way to descend into a life of degradation that just is very difficult to get out of. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, I mean, I was really exposed to the world of addiction. I went into it, wanting to help a friend in the only way I really could, which was by using my art. And I believe that art actually plays an important role in the healing process, whether it be drugs or whatever addiction. I mean, my other thought is that we all have addictions, that we all have something that takes us away from the grim realities of the world we live in today. And mine is art. And I've like a drug addict, I get highs from when my work is being shown, and especially influencing people or inspiring people or talking to somebody like you who, I don't know, we never met before, but you have your podcast and are trying to help people. That's what my book's about too. And in that book, I tell the story of my life and how I got to that room.
wow. And if somebody were an aspiring filmmaker today and interested in becoming a filmmaker or making a career of it, would it be helpful to read your book to get started there?
Well, yeah, for sure, it would. I mean, it might dissuade them from doing it. I mean, art is a hard thing to do. Um, and I'm very honest about my journey as an artist. I mean, it started when I was 12 years old when I took my first photograph. It was a Polaroid image, and I was 12 years old. And when I saw that picture develop in front of my eyes, this was long before digital imaging and stuff. That was magic to me. And you know, I guess it's like would have been like, I don't know, Hendrix picking up a guitar or something. It changed my life, and I've taken photographs since. I've documented my life, which um, is interesting. Because I've led a kind of interesting life. It's not a normal life being an artist.
Yeah. And like, has that is that like have you been able to throughout your career, like has that been you've been able to survive as an artist? Like that's your income? I mean, because I think a lot of people would love to be a professional artist, and it just at times can seem impossible, especially these days where everybody is a content creator and putting stuff out there. Now we have AI, and that's terrifying everybody. Um, but yeah, so you've made a career of being an artist.
Well, yeah, I made a career of being a commercial artist. I grew up in Montreal and I moved to Toronto when I was 31 years old to pursue photography. And yeah, I had a clients. I was shooting for ad agencies, magazines. My photography career went further than I actually ever thought it would. But then in 2007, what we're talking on now came out, and that leveled me as a photographer. It's like, because everybody could do it and do it well, and you didn't need any knowledge. You could, cameras take these phones take amazing pictures now, but you buy a good digital camera, you just have to turn it on, put it on automatic, and it takes amazing pictures. So that had a huge effect on my career, my career took a nosedive. And it's part of the reason why I started making documentaries, because I used the same technology that was hammering me to make films. And that's the film we're talking about cost me $45 to shoot.
Wow. And well, you didn't have, there was no iPhone back then, right? So you definitely did not, but I know they had some decent cameras, like pre-iPhone, they had those, you could even record to an SD card at 720p video. So there was some pretty good equipment even at that time.
Yeah, the camera I used was it was a Canon, uh just a regular camera. I didn't bring lights, I didn't bring a microphone. I didn't go down there thinking I was shooting a film. I was going down there to interview I knew I was recording because that's part of the story, but I never thought that I'd walk out of there with this film, this powerful, powerful film. That, when I saw it, I went, okay, I have a bit of a responsibility with this. I think, like, as you read it, when you read the book, the first thing I wanted to do was just put it away and never see it again. But then I went, no, there's a reason this happened. And I mean, that's how it evolved. I just couldn't get it out of my mind. And it still affects me to this day.
Yeah. What was your intention going? Was it for an intervention? Like were you going, the woman's name was Lisa, right? And
Yeah. So, Lisa, it wasn't an intervention at all. What it was Lisa was at our house. So, Lisa had been in and out of rehab clinics, which is that what you are, rehab doctor? Is that correct?
yeah, yeah, usually outpatient, people come to the office or we do it with telemedicine and mostly opioids, alcohol, and also benzodiazepine dependence, which is not really an addiction. It's more of and that's an interesting thing with drugs. Some drugs are very addicting, psychologically addicting. Some cause physical dependence with addiction, and some cause physical dependence without addiction. So yeah, crack cocaine or regular cocaine does not have much of a physical withdrawal, but it's very addicting. Opioids are both. Opioids are addicting and physical dependence. Then the benzos are mostly just physical dependence without the addiction. So yeah, like sometimes people like just kind of think it's all addiction, but yeah, but yeah, for crack cocaine, there's not. It's kind of like tuberculosis treatment before they had the antibiotics for it. But nobody really knew what to do, so they sent people off to these sanatorium places to get some fresh air and hopefully they would get better and at least keep them away from society. So yeah, sending someone with a crack addiction to rehab is kind of like that. You hope for the best, but it's not really a great medical treatment.
Right, right. So she had been in a bunch of treatment centers over the years, and she'd get clean and then relapse when she got out. And at one point, she was over at our house for dinner, and she was clean. She'd been clean for a couple of months, I guess, and she was telling us stories about her life. And I asked her to look at it was a trailer I'd made about a friend of mine was in a very bad situation with drugs, and I had been shooting, videotaping him for a while, and I thought I had captured something interesting about addiction. So I asked her if she would look at the trailer, and she looked at it and she said, "Yeah, you really captured what it's like to live as an addict in society." And then before she left, she said, if I ever go back into it, I'll call you and you can interview me. So it was 6 months later. I hadn't heard from her. Get this call on I think it was a Tuesday afternoon. And she just said, "Do you want to come down and interview me?" So I grabbed my camera and went and interviewed her. I didn't know it wasn't for a film, and it certainly wasn't an intervention.
Okay, and yeah, and I saw that I did see the trailer for it, which is really, and I recommend people look at that, and that really makes you want to see the film, and I think she's talking about like pricing, how what she charges men for prostitution, and the first thing I'm thinking is like your prices are way too low. I mean, you should be charging 10 times that or something. But I guess that's
Right.
where the addiction comes in. Is it it's just about getting the money and probably not really thinking that through, or I don't know how that works out, but
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my biggest concerns when I got out of there was like I know the dangers of drug addictions, but the dangers I saw of her, how she was getting her drugs, was
Yeah.
more alarming to me than anything. Like, talk about dangerous.
Oh,
And
yeah. I mean, it's,
she was on her own.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, just not, I mean, not just the risk of sexually transmitted illnesses, diseases, and I mean, that's
Abuse
a
and
deadly thing right there. But yeah, abuse, you don't know who you're bringing into the room. I mean, it could be someone that's very violent or,
right.
a murderer. I mean, there's, yeah, horrible. It's a horrible situation to be in. And I think, when people get in that situation of crack addiction, especially, their entire world just becomes all about there's money and there's crack, and I need to find a way to put them together without the police getting in the way of it. And there's really not much more to your thinking than that.
Yeah, I mean, she was a different person than the person I had met when I first moved to Toronto. Drugs had really changed her, and it's sad and it's painful to watch and it's painful to live through. And drugs and addiction are, they tear people apart.
Yeah. Did she now I remember reading that at the at the Oprah show that she had, I think, 16 days clean at that point. Did she ever have any long-term success like after that, or what happened after that?
um yeah, so when she appeared on Oprah, she had just started a 2 month uh, program in California. Because of the film, a treatment center in California offered her 2 months of free treatment. And so while she was there, we got this opportunity to be on Oprah. It had been going on for a while, but it finally came up, and they said, if you're going to do it, it's got to be this time, this show. So we somehow pulled it together, and she was 16 days clean when she got there. Then she went back right after the show, because the show was taped in Chicago, and she went right back to the treatment center, finished her 2 months in California. Then I went out to at that point we were shooting uh, a sequel documentary, because my my concept was that I'm interested to see if this film can actually help a person get to sobriety. And it was like, it had changed her life, and she was, making media appearances. Now all these things are hard too. Like, there's a whole lot going on there. So Lisa was really brave to do all of this. But when she, after California, we came, like, I went out there, shot some stuff of her and some of the doctors who had treated her there. And I thought I thought it was the Hollywood ending, literally the Hollywood ending to this incredible story. And then when she got back to Toronto, she relapsed again. And then, kept trying, kept going back. She finally went into a long-term treatment center outside of Toronto for a year, and then went back to school and came back to Toronto. And she lives in Toronto now, and she lives a couple of blocks from me. We don't talk anymore, if we haven't for a long time. I think the film, and I assume the book might, I'm not sure she's happy with it, but again, I had never finished what I had set out to do, which was to inspire people to try to quit their addiction.
Yeah. So she is
That,
alive and well and successful in her recovery, probably for many years, as far as we know.
yeah, yep,
And I mean, that by itself, that's inspiring. And if that film can, and your book can help people maybe skip over some of that, the horrors of what can happen and addiction. I mean, because I think people get to certain points where they have to make a decision. Are they going to cross a certain line and be willing to do something that they were never willing to do before? And you have to make that decision. Do I steal my friend's wallet, or do I go to get help and go to a meeting or go to rehab, or, does someone make the decision to go into prostitution, or say that that's a line I'm just not going to cross? And, maybe looking at your work, at your film and reading your book, that could help someone to, you know, maybe make that decision, make the right decision, say, that's a line I really can't cross, and I'm going to make that, the final. That's my bottom. I'm not going any lower than that.
Well, yeah, and it totally did. It achieved that because what my book chronicles is the journey of the film and the responses I got from it. And literally, there were people who wrote. We had a website at the time, and we were blogging, saying if I didn't see your film tonight, I think I'd be dead. So it changed many people's lives, and I think it's also a good book for families of addicts, because that's one of the hardest things, to watch somebody you love, especially if it's a child or sister, brother, whatever, to be taken away like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely very difficult for families. And it does help, I think, when someone, that's why sometimes the parents or the siblings or spouses of someone with an addiction, they'll go to support meetings and try to connect with other people going through the same thing to get a better understanding of it.
Yeah.
And that's something that you're offering is a look into that, a view into that world of what is it like, what are they going through? And, it's not just a junkie on the street in a back alley or a cheap hotel room. It's a real person who had a real life. And um, I mean, people have real stories. If you go up to anybody, like who's shooting up in an alley, that's a person who had a job, they had parents, they grew up in a home. I mean, and not everybody grew up in a broken home or on the streets. I mean, like for example, Lisa, in your story, she had a very nice upbringing, grew up in a nice home, which is actually pretty more common than people think.
Yeah.
I think that it's
Yeah.
people do can have pretty uneventful upbringings. Grow up in nice homes, they have all their toys and good school and nice neighborhood, and um,
And
somehow they
they can afford it.
yeah. Yeah, one thing leads to another. There's gateways. Now everybody, it's popular now to say cannabis or marijuana is completely safe. It's not a gateway drug. In fact, I was kind of shocked. I always knew it was a gateway drug. It seems obvious. I mean, there's anything that can get a person intoxicated in a social situation that makes them more open to the possibility of trying something they wouldn't normally try would be a gateway. So alcohol, marijuana. But yeah, now when you look it up, everyone's like, well, marijuana is not a gateway. Marijuana is like it cures everything and it's harmless and it's never hurt a single person, which is not true. That's just like the pro cannabis. And I'm not completely against it. I think it does help people. It definitely has medicinal use, but it can also be a gateway to much worse things like crack and fentanyl and heroin.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. My thing is anything you can get addicted to anything. I live in Canada where pot is legal, and I'm a pot smoker. I'm not an addict.
Yeah.
I use it more for creativity, as a tool. But yeah, so could smoking marijuana lead to further things? Yes. But I think the real thing that addicts have to deal with is the trauma that they're trying to cover up, right? That's, I think, addiction, from what I've studied. I'm not a doctor, but I certainly looked into it and have been exposed to it, because when the film started going out like it did, when it got to going around the world, I was being inundated by people reaching out to me going, would you tell my story? And then they tell me their story, and I just go, oh my God, like it just got worse and worse. And I, I couldn't because I just didn't have the capacity. There was so much going on in my life, but I definitely listened and responded to everybody and said, like, you know, good luck if nothing else. But yeah, it's a tricky addiction. Still has this stigma to it that it's people who should just quit and just stop it. But it's not that easy, as a smoker will tell you, like, which I think is the worst addiction, smoking cigarettes. But that's legal,
Yeah,
and alcohol's legal, and I
yeah,
drink
two of them.
alcohol, but I'm glad I don't have that problem, because that's as bad as any addiction, and it'll kill you one way or the other if it takes control.
Yeah, alcohol is a very dirty drug that's and really there's no good amount of alcohol. Now they've come out with that where they say there's no completely safe amount of alcohol. But there's people that don't have an alcohol addiction and they can, have a half a glass of wine now and then, a sip of champagne once a year. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, alcohol is definitely a problem for people. Yes, cigarettes, nicotine. Uh, some people would say it's the most addicting drug on the planet. There's nothing more addicting than nicotine. With things like methamphetamine and cocaine, like probably right after on the list of most addicting. But yeah, nicotine is at the top. But yeah, I think addiction is something that affects a lot of people, maybe even everybody. And you're right, trauma is usually what leads to it, and trauma is underlying most addictions. And trauma is not always, you definitely in your work you've come across people that have had obvious trauma. They've been abused, beaten as children, have had grown up in broken homes. But there's also more subtle trauma. Someone can have what looks from the outside like a perfect upbringing, and maybe their parents weren't there for them. Maybe they were, you know, the way their siblings treated them was not that nice, or the way their friends, maybe they were bullied.
Yeah.
So someone can appear from the outside to have like a great life. Their families have money and they live in a nice home in a nice neighborhood, great school, and they could still be suffering silently with trauma.
Well, I think we all have trauma in our childhood, and that there's something about that period in your life, like if that you're going to go through trauma. Life is trauma. Life is trauma. It's highs and lows, and it's somehow controlling those lows and controlling those highs, because the highs are as dangerous as the lows, I think.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
What can I ask you? What got you into becoming an addiction doctor?
I just, I mean, there are people in my family that have issues with addiction and people that I know, and it was just an interest to me. And I actually, I went to they used to have a course. Yeah, now they've done away with it, but there was an 8-hour course you had to do to get certified to prescribe Suboxone and similar medications to treat opioid addiction. And in 2006, I actually went to the course by accident. I thought it was a different course I was going to, and I drove to Miami, which is like, probably a 45-minute drive from home, and showed up at this Saturday course. It was like an all-day thing, and there were some doctors there that I knew, I was familiar with, and I thought, well, I'm already here and it's already paid for, and I have nothing else to do today. I might as well just sit through and learn about whatever we're going to talk about. And it was very intriguing, the fact that here was something that could treat addiction and get people off the streets and off heroin and off with pain pills and into recovery. And it was still controversial. I think it still is to some degree, but people are more
Right.
understanding about it, that when someone takes a medication like Suboxone, they're not acting or thinking addictively. In fact, it takes those highs and lows that you get with street drugs and levels it off. The dopamine levels are more stable, and a person can feel very quickly as if they were never addicted in the first place and live a normal life as long as they continue the medication. And then that tapering off the medication long term can be difficult. for some people, but the medication itself is life-saving, and it allows a person to get their life back very quickly. Unfortunately, we don't have that yet for crack or methamphetamine. Alcohol, there's some promising things. There's what's something called the Sinclair method, where people can take an opioid blocker, naltrexone, and that can help them gradually taper off of alcohol instead of abruptly stopping it. So there's yeah, and the psychedelic treatments are very intriguing, although that's still being worked out and studied. And there may be some great things coming up in the next few years as far as psychedelic treatment for all kinds of mental illnesses, including addiction. Um, so yeah, so I just find it like a very intriguing thing of just but yeah, the magic of treating opioid addiction with buprenorphine, which is the main ingredient of Suboxone, it's almost miraculous. It's like people like over a period of their first month just kind of wake up and go from being that you don't even recognize them in the first few visits. That's happened to me many times that I see someone come in, I'm like, oh, who's that? And oh, that's who it is. Like I don't even recognize them. They're not even the same person they were just weeks ago.
And this is an approved drug.
Oh yeah, yeah, approved since I think 2000 is when they came out with the law allowing it. In 2002, the Suboxone was released and or it was approved by the FDA. And the drug itself was actually around much longer than that. It was used for pain management before. It's a mild
Is it
opioid combined. It's at the same time it's a blocker, a receptor blocker, and partially activates the receptor. So technically it's classified as an opioid, but when people say it's just trading one drug for another or trading an addiction for another addiction, that's not true. It definitely
right?
is a different kind of a thing. A person goes, they go from obsessing over their drug to just stabilizing and starting to be feel as if they feel just like they felt before they were addicted in the first place. And they're able to just kind of go back to work, back to family life.
Wow.
It's yeah, it's not great for the rehab business, as far as people going in and out of rehab over and over again, because people are able to stay out of rehab when they stick to that treatment. But
Well,
um,
it is a business.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And there's some conflict of interest there, when they do benefit when people relapse and come back again. And so
Yeah.
ideally I think we're on the verge of some groundbreaking treatments coming out that will help people with crack and cocaine and methamphetamine addictions better.
Good.
Um, so anyway,
But
so
it
oh,
but
go
it's
ahead.
interesting. It's interesting how you got into it by going somewhere you weren't expecting to. Like that's what when writing my book, and it took me 10 years to write this book. But just going back over your life and find these little things, what seems like coincidences or something, actually change your life and begin to make your sense of your life. Like it took me like since I've written this book, it's been a very good for my mental health. I did a lot of introspection. I think writing is a great tool for people who are struggling with anything. It's another art form, but like my book, and I only release my book as a hard copy. You can't get a digital version because part of what I want to do is get people off their phones for a while. Not
Yeah.
that phones are all bad; they're great, they're unbelievable tools. But what's going on now? I mean, from when I grew up without any of this, right? Like I grew up, I became a teen in the 70s where there was no phone, no iPhones or computers, and to me that was freedom. And I have kids, I have two daughters who are in their 20s now, and I look at their lives and I go, man, you missed something with all that. I know I sound like an old man, but there was something about being unconnected, and
Yeah.
kids and everybody should get unconnected for a while.
That never-ending social media scrolling that they do is, I mean, unfortunately, it's not all that different from crack use. It's
It's it,
safer. It's definitely a lot safer physically, but it's the same exact thing. You just keep going back over and over and over again, saying, "I'll stop after one more. I'll stop after one more," and you just find yourself hours and maybe even days later just crashing, passing out, realizing you've done nothing but kept
It,
going.
it it's the worst addiction. I think it's worse
Yeah,
than any drug addiction. Like
yeah,
I'm not exaggerating it. I'm a looker. Like when I go out on the streets, I usually have my camera, but I'm looking at people all the time, and their heads are never up.
yeah,
Like people are always on their phones. Everybody, and it's like, well, not everybody. But the
yeah,
majority, and communication, which is so easy now, I find it's getting harder and harder to communicate with people because they don't know how to communicate.
yeah. Yeah, you've probably been in this situation where one of your kids is right in front of you, and the best way to get through to them is send them a text message.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes that doesn't work
Yeah, yeah, you got to
because
find all
there's,
kinds of new ways to get through to them.
yeah, I mean, hopefully talking to them face to face is the best way to do it. Right.
Yeah, yeah, ideally that would be definitely the best way.
Yeah.
So yeah, Paul Perrier, thank you for joining me in that podcast. And where can someone get your book if they want to read it today?
So it's available on Amazon. Just put Cracked Wide Open. It'll come up. Yeah, it's an independent book. If anybody's struggling with addiction, but I also think, like you said before, if you're an artist of something, I mean it to be an inspiring story for artists, although it tells a very rough road. That's what you'll go through, and hopefully you'll find some sort of purpose with your work. And I've found a purpose with my work, and I plan to keep hopefully helping people and inspiring people.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks,
Uh,
thanks, Mark.
let me just turn off Zoom is going to cut us off in a